The Cleveland Cavaliers. Donovan Mitchell's not moving. The team is intact. They've got a new coach. Can they take it one step further? Michael Bolton thinks so.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and yo, thank you for the subs, chat. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at LockedOnFantasyBasketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Every day, all through the summer, we know that the sports are fewer. There's just not as many things going on, but FanDuel's got you. Every day, every customer gets either a daily boost or a bonus. Go to FanDuel.com right now to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms. You know what to do. YouTube and audio, that's a double bang. A thumb, a comment, all that is really, really useful as we talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. So let's talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers, and let's do it right now. All right, and for the first time in doing this Cavs season preview, I've got a different host because Locked On Cavs has a new host. So let's welcome in Danny Cunningham. Danny, welcome to the show for the first time, and welcome to Locked On Podcast Network and hosting Locked On Cavs.
Thank you. I very much appreciate you having me on. I'm super excited to talk Cleveland Cavaliers basketball. As you know, we are now, getting closer and closer to the NBA season with every day that passes.
We're getting there. It takes a little bit of time to get there, and as happens so often with the Cavs, is they tend to leave a lot of their business for some reason through until September. We remember with the Colin Sexton restricted free agency and the sign and trade ended up with Larry Markkinen happened like in the middle of September. And this team at the moment, there's just not much going on. Like, they just haven't done anything, and their team is just sort of the same, but we don't think it's necessarily going to end up exactly the same in terms of what has happened. They drafted Jaylon Tyson, and that's it. Like, there's whispers that Luke Travers is going to come across and maybe take a two-way, but Daniel, I don't think that has actually been confirmed yet, has it?
No, that hasn't been confirmed. I mean, obviously, he was let out of his contract with Melbourne United. So now it's and they specified that it was for him to pursue NBA opportunities. Now, if an NBA opportunity doesn't arise, could he go play in Europe? Could he find another professional team to go play for? Sure, I guess. But the Cavs have his NBA rights. He spoke prior to the Las Vegas Summer League when the Cavs had their little summer camp here in Cleveland. He met with the media and he talked about how he wants to be an NBA player. He thinks he is an NBA role player. He said there's this list of guys that have been drafted and stashed that never made their way over to the NBA. And one of his coaches over in Australia showed him that, and he doesn't want to end up on that list. So I would say, okay, maybe he ends up on a two-way. I don't think that moves the needle with the Cavs this year. Ultimately, you mentioned Jaylon Tyson. That's really the only on-court addition the Cavs have. The biggest acquisition that they made, at least the way they're spinning it, I think, is hiring Kenny Atkinson as head coach. That's the biggest thing of their offseason.
I agree. We'll talk Atkinson in a minute because I agree that is the change, and I think there are significant changes with that. But I just want to focus a little bit here on Jaylon Tyson, who was picked at number 20 in the draft. I thought he was really strong in summer league. I think he's 21 or 22, a little bit of an older player coming out of college, playing for Cal. I was impressed with the multiple things that he did in college, and then he translated that across to summer league. He passes a little bit, he shoots a little bit, he defends pretty well. To me, I'm not really sure what his role will be initially, but it does feel like he is the guy that they want to be that replacement for a Karis LeVert, a guy that can come in and he can play the one, he can play the two, he can go up and he play the three, he shoots. I think he's probably a better shooter than LeVert, but just can handle the ball, can run as a point guard if you need to. That's how that all feels. So he'll get sort of his feet wet this season, and then with LeVert's contract, I think starts to come up in a year or two, then that is how that all looks to me from an outside perspective.
Yeah, so LeVert will be a free agent next summer. So a year from now, he could be on the Cavs. They could choose to resign him, whatever, but he hits free agency next July. So that is something to keep in mind when you talk about Jaylon Tyson. I think that he does, as you mentioned, I think he does a lot of things really well. I don't know if there's anything outside of his motor that is like an elite level skill. I think he's an awesome rebounder for a guy his size, and I think that really showed itself during the Las Vegas Summer League. It's clear to me, and I think a lot of this has to do with what his role was at Cal, where that team just wasn't very talented. And I don't watch a ton of college basketball. I don't know if you do, but if you watch a lot of college basketball, you could tell by watching them play that they were not a very talented team. And Tyson had to do really everything. Like, he was their point guard. And with the Cavs and the way the roster is set up right now, obviously that's not going to be his role. But I do think he's someone that comes in, and maybe he doesn't play right away, but I think he's the type of guy that's going to be in the rotation by the end of the year. And I think he's someone with, just as you try and project him out, I don't know how high his ceiling is. Like, I don't ever see him being an all-star or anything like that, but I think he's got a pretty high floor. Yep. Like, it is difficult for me to see him just not ever turning into a good NBA player. I do believe that at some point in his career, he's going to be a good NBA player that is a winner, that does things that helps, whether it's the Cavs or someone else at a certain point, helps a team win high-level basketball games.
Yeah, that's what I see him as well, like someone who can just fill in what you need. Like, do you need me to shoot? Do you need me to pass? Do you need me to defend? What do you need me to do? And that sort of a play. Like, I don't think there's a particularly high-level, skill that he's better than everyone at, or that this is his one thing. It's like, you do many different things and I'll fill in on, which is perfect as a six man, honestly, which again is what Karis LeVert has had over these last couple of years of filling. He has some of his own issues in terms of efficiency and things like that. I'm not saying that Tyson won't have that, but it just, that sort of struck me that way. Also, the Cavs, they were like, hey, do we have to play Ty Jerome and Craig Porter at times last season? So there is an opportunity on this roster for Tyson to be able to step in and maybe do a little bit more on the other side of things in terms of the guys that have left. Marcus Morris was on this team amazingly last season, Tristan Thompson, Damian Jones, and then Amani Bates, Isaiah Mobley, Pete Nance as the two-way guys. None of those guys have been brought back at this point, but as is going to be a common theme with this show, Danny, is that there's just a lot of business that hasn't been done with this squad, and that brings us, I ask all the hosts, to answer specific questions about the biggest additions and the biggest loss. And at the moment, when we look at the roster, Isaac Okoro is not on it. So we'll put him here as the biggest loss. But I don't know. I don't know what's going on with him. And this all ties back. Like, they left the Colin Sexton thing for ages. They leave all this business for a long time. Okoro lost his role to a degree last season with the addition of Max Strus. So his minutes is at 27. He has very low usage. He's never really turned into anything offensively, but they're not letting him go, surely. Like, what's the hold up here? Because A, they've got the roster spots. B, who the hell else is taking him? What are they waiting for?
So I think that Isaac Okoro wanted to get paid this offseason, obviously, as anyone in his position would. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he and the Cavs clearly have been able to come to an agreement on a number. And he wasn't able to get that number from anywhere else because he is a restricted free agent. So he could have signed an offer sheet with, say, the Utah Jazz, who had plenty of cap space this offseason. Well, now cap space everywhere has evaporated. There's nowhere that Isaac Okoro can go and sign an offer sheet and just say, hey, Cavs, you can match this or you can't. Now, a sign-in trade still could be worked out. The Brooklyn Nets have been a team that were pretty heavily rumored to be interested in Isaac Okoro a couple of months ago. I think that if they really wanted Isaac Okoro on the roster, he'd be on the roster by now. So I've kind of gone back and forth. Like, I went into this offseason thinking, okay, Isaac Okoro and the Cavs are going to come to terms on probably a 3-year contract extension. He'll be back in Cleveland. And then I went through a phase where, you know what, I think he's probably going to end up in a sign-in trade somewhere else. And now I'm back to, I think Isaac Okoro is going to be back in Cleveland. I don't know if it's going to be on a longer term deal, like a 3 or 4 year deal, or if it's going to just be playing the string out on the qualifying offer so he can give it a run in free agency again next year where he's an unrestricted free agent. But it's difficult for me to see a number of suitors out there because you brought up Lauri Markkanen, who the Cavs acquired via sign and trade very late in the process a couple years ago. And then Colin Sexton, who was signed and traded to Utah as part of the Donovan Mitchell trade. I don't see right now a big move for the Cavs like either of those that Isaac Okoro can be signed and traded as part of, because those were, and Lauri Markkanen obviously has developed into a much better player than he was the day the Cavs acquired him.
Yep.
And Donovan Mitchell, that deal was obviously a mega trade with everything the Cavs gave up for a guy that now is become an all NBA player. I don't see the Cavs being able to take part in something like that. So it's difficult for me to see a team that really just makes a lot of sense to sign and trade him to. So at this point, I don't know what it's going to look like contractually, but I do expect him to be back in Cleveland again for another year, just because what other suitors are there?
That's it. There's just no real other option. So it's going to be like PJ Washington was one of these ones last year in Charlotte as well that sort of lingered, and then eventually he came back, and we'll see what they end up doing there. We've got more to talk about with this team when we go through some projected lineups. But first of all, I got to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Across the summer, there is just fewer sports, and that is a simple fact that FanDuel loves telling us. But we know this, and they're going to help you out because all through the summer, every single day, every customer over on FanDuel gets one of two things. It's either a daily boost or a daily bonus. Now, I don't know how they work it out. I don't know who gets a boost, who gets a bonus, what day you get it. That's outside of my purview of this talking about FanDuel, but that's okay because you're going to get one of those two things. So maybe that's part of the mystery. You wake up, go, what did I get? Did I get a bonus? Did I get a boost? What sports are on today? Well, Major League Baseball, WNBA starting back up. NFL preseason is on. Things are starting to get back to normal, and FanDuel has got you covered. So go to FanDuel.com right now, get started, and make the most out of your summer. FanDuel is also an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, so I talked about the guys that have come and gone. It's a very, very short list, Danny. What I want to talk about now is the projected starters, which is also probably a really, really short discussion because it's like literally exactly the same as what we saw last year. Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, who signed the extension, and I'm sure you are absolutely thrilled that you do not have to address every rumor of Donovan Mitchell coming or going, or should they trade him. It's done. Like, we don't have to worry about it this year. Like, he is there, he is signed, and you are free of the shackles of that nonsense. Strus, Mobley, and Allen. Like, that's your starters. Let's talk Mitchell, because he was, you just said, like, they acquired Donovan Mitchell, an All-NBA talent. Now, he didn't make All-NBA team because the second half of the season, his knees were done. Like, he just couldn't sort of stay healthy with those knee problems. He was playing at that All-NBA level. So this is going to tie in a little bit to when we talk about the new coach, but is there any worry about that being an ongoing and persistent issue for Donovan?
I mean, anytime a guy has injuries like that, particularly when there's such a high minutes player, where Donovan Mitchell has played a ton of minutes and played a ton of minutes under JB Bickerstaff, the former head coach of the Cavs, you do have, long-term concerns, especially when someone like Donovan, who he is one of the more explosive guys, I think, athletically in the league, where he's not a big guard by any stretch of the imagination, but he's super explosive. He's a terrific athlete. So you, of course, do wonder about that lingering, but I have no reason other than just, natural wonderment to believe that that is an issue going into this season. I have no reason, no proof that's hampered him at all this offseason. So I expect Donovan Mitchell to be full go and to be, frankly, great when the basketball starts bouncing in Cleveland for training camp, preseason, regular season. I expect Donovan Mitchell to continue to play at an all-NBA level, because since he's been in Cleveland, that's all he's done. His first year in Cleveland was second-team All-NBA. I thought he should have been first-team All-NBA. He just missed it. This past year, obviously he didn't meet the games threshold due to those knee injuries that he had to deal with. Had he played enough games, I'm pretty confident he would have been named an All-NBA player again. He was playing, I thought, the best basketball of his career. So for him, it's all about health. As a guard who plays his type of style at his size and how explosive he is, of course, you're always going to worry about that. But I have no reason to believe that this should linger from last year into this season. Yeah,
I'm in the same boat. Like, it was obviously annoying last season, and that really caused a problem. We are going to really talk about Kenny Atkinson in a second. I know I'm teasing this. We will get to talk about that in a second, but I am not that worried about it. It's not like he's had like a specific, you tore this ligament and then you've torn it again, which is where I start to get really worried. Like, it's a problem, but I'm not worried that it's something that's every year this is going to be a problem, and Donovan Mitchell's knees are going to be killing us every year. I'm not that worried about that sort of thing. But what we can talk about now is the way that the bench likely looks. And again, it's just the same stuff. It's Karis LeVert, it's Okoro if he is back, it's George Niang, it's Dean Wade, who had his share of injury issues there. I think we've talked probably enough about Okoro. We talked a little bit about LeVert, but like this team is just literally personnel-wise the same. So I don't see that there's huge amounts that are going to be changing in the way that this works, even though there is a new coach.
No, I don't think so either. I think the biggest thing that can change for the better is, one, how they deploy some of these guys in the roles that they're coming in off of the bench. But to how healthy Dean Wade is, you brought up some of the injuries that he's had and just how much time he's missed. When he's been on the floor for the Cavs have been much better. But he's not been able to stay healthy over the last couple of years. He's had knee issues of his own. He had a shoulder issue a couple of years back. Dean Wade has not been able to stay healthy enough for how good he is, because he's someone that, he is 6'8", 6'9". He can play the four. He's a really good defender. He's a strong shooter from the outside. He is something where the Cavs, you can talk about their starting lineup, how they've got two bigs. They've got two ball dominant guards. They've got a bunch of guys, it feels like, that are 6'5" or 6'6" in Isaac Okoro and Max Strus and Karis LeVert. But they don't really have many guys that are 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". That's Dean Wade. They've only, it feels to me like, while he's not the best player on the Cavs, obviously, I don't think he's in the top 5 or 6 in terms of best players on the Cavs. But all of the players, for the most part, that are better than him on this team, they've got a pretty clear replacement on this roster. Dean Wade doesn't. So he, to me, is a big key. If he's going to be healthy and able to give the Cavs, 70 games and be healthy in the playoffs, I feel better about this team than if he's going to miss a ton of time again for the third year in a row.
Yeah, you're right. Like, he fills that role of a guy that can defend threes and fours and shoot a little bit and stay out of the way and rebound and just have some of that heft. And it has been a real stretch with those injuries over the last couple of seasons. But now that the time has come, Danny, because we do now talk about the new coach, JB Bickerstaff, who I did not like as a coach when he was in Houston and Memphis. I thought he was quite a bad coach for a lot of that time. He had some good moments in Cleveland. I thought he worked, especially last season when there were injuries in the middle of the year. I thought he worked some really strong lineups, but there have been some issues in the playoffs, and now they bring in Kenny Atkinson. And the one thing that I think for people who are watching this and from a fantasy basketball perspective is the difference here is we can talk about Tom Thibodeau and we can criticize his minutes. We can talk about Nick Nurse and the way that he deploys his minutes, and it's all fair. He does it. Bickerstaff was playing these guys a million minutes. He would not go into his bench ever. It was like 37 minutes for Mitchell and 35 here and 36. Like, he'd run like a tight rotation. Those guys would play a ton. They'd play all the time. And then we have this problem with Donovan Mitchell creep up and other injuries. Not saying that's Bickerstaff's fault, but the reason I want to talk about that now is that Kenny Atkinson is like legitimately the opposite. When he coached in Brooklyn, it's like, 11 guys, that's what we're doing, and no one's playing more than 33 minutes. We want to be smart with this. We want to be have preservation in mind in terms of the player's health and being able to perform at the right level. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, I'm pretty sure that sort of after he was hired, he was coming out and saying similar things as well about using the whole roster and taking care of that rotation. So in terms of the difference, the players might be the same, but I'm not suggesting they're going to go to an 11-man rotation, but I think we're going to see that 36, 37 minutes come to 34, 33 for some of these higher-end guys, and they lose 1 to 2 minutes off what they were doing last season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. I do think that there are going to be some significant stylistic changes between the two coaches that we can get into, but Kenny Atkinson did mention a couple months ago when he was introduced to the media here in Cleveland, he mentioned that guys are going to not play full minutes loads the way that they have in the past. They're not going to be playing 36, 37 minutes a night. Now, when, if there's a game that goes into overtime and it's required, yeah, of course that's going to happen, but it's not going to happen on a regular basis, I don't think, the way that it did under JB Bickerstaff. And I do think that's part of the thing that probably led to Donovan Mitchell's knee issues last year is not just how many minutes he was playing last year. And part of that was, and it's hard for me to fault Bickerstaff for Donovan playing so many minutes when both Darius Garland and Evan Mobley were out for 6 weeks. Like, that's a tough thing for me to say, hey, you should have pulled back on Donovan a little bit because you really didn't have anybody else. And they went into last year thinking Ty Jerome was going to be a backup point guard and they were going to have Ricky Rubio. Well, Ricky Rubio decided that he wanted to retire from the NBA, and Ty Jerome hurt his ankle and never played again after the second game. So they really didn't have a ton of other choices. I do think they'll have more options this year. Should Ty Jerome be healthy? I think Craig Porter Jr. is a fine player, but I also think Kenny Atkinson's going to have a bigger picture in mind. You take a look at what this team has done the last 3 years, where they won 44 games, lost in the play-in 3 years ago, won 51 games, lost in the first round 2 years ago. This past year, yeah, they took a little bit of a step back regular season win total, and I think a lot of that has to do with some injuries they had, but they made it to the second round. The goal for this team is not going to be, we have to win X number of regular season games. The goal is we have to win in the playoffs. And I think Kenny Atkinson is going to have that in mind all year. And that's going to be something that leads to probably some lower minute totals in December, in January, and February.
Mitchell played 35.3 minutes last season. He played 35.8 the season prior. And I'm not out here suggesting that we're going to have everyone playing 29 minutes a night, but going from 35 or 36 as it was for Mitchell the year before to 34, it's a difference. It changes things. And if everyone loses a minute or 2 minutes, it opens up more minutes for bench guys. It changes the rotation, but also just reduces, like your Mitchell averaged 26.6 points in that last season in Utah. Is at 25 points in under 34 minutes. So they're small changes, but they're not insignificant ones, especially considering the way that they would run the rotations in previous seasons. And Atkinson's philosophy is basically if you could find a coach who would have the exact opposite philosophy, like that is him. He is the polar opposite of how we run a rotation, and this idea of let's get more guys in and spread the load versus I'm relying on 7 guys and screw everybody else, which is a way that many coaches run. It's just not the way that Kenny Atkinson does do things. We've got some more stuff to get into now. In fact, what we are going to talk about right now is the player to watch. And this is an interesting one because we can watch this man. He received a contract extension. He suffered an injury last season, Evan Mobley, and had, I thought, an improved season. But I also think that you hear like the general talk about Evan Mobley, and there are people who are like, I'm disappointed in what he's done. He hasn't gone to the levels that we thought. I think that's an unfair standard to actually hold him to. I've been really impressed with what Mobley does. Like, what was he, second in Defensive Player of the Year as a second-year player? Like, that's not a normal thing, Danny. That's not like, that's people go, he hasn't taken the steps. I hope, like, bro, as a second-year player, nobody is runner-up in defense. I know Wemby was, but that's the level that you're talking at. And yes, the offense hasn't come along, but there are also reasons for that. I want to know why you have him as the player to watch this season, because I've always been very high on Mobley, and I think that there's some of the criticisms that go with him, I think have been unfair, to be honest.
So I completely agree about him defensively. Obviously, he is in my opinion, one of the best defensive players in basketball. And had he not missed so many games, I think, when he was healthy, he was playing at a first-team all-defense level again last year, in addition to, 2 years ago being named first-team all-defense. I believe he finished third in Defensive Player of the Year, as you mentioned. Like, he was awesome.
Yep.
Offensively, I do think he needs to be better. And the reason why Evan Mobley is the player to watch is think back to the day the Cavs made the trade for Donovan Mitchell. And Donovan Mitchell in Utah, I don't think was as good of a basketball player as Donovan Mitchell has been in Cleveland. And that is something that I do think needs to be said to preface this conversation. But that trade that Kobe Altman, the Cavs president of basketball operations, made, I don't think was a bet on Donovan Mitchell. I think that trade, which came this summer, or I guess at that point it was almost fall, going into Evan Mobley's second year, that trade was a bet on Evan Mobley becoming a great player. Because the Cavs at that point could say, okay, if Evan Mobley becomes what we believe Evan Mobley can become, and he's, I think, been really good, but he's not reached that level yet, and it's wildly unfair to write him off, and it's wildly unfair, I think, to be disappointed in him, but he's not developed all the way yet. And there's still a ton of time. Like, he's a 22, 23-year-old kid. But that trade was a bet on Evan Mobley becoming a guy that can be the best player on the championship team. Because if Evan Mobley is that means Donovan Mitchell is your second best player. And there's not very many guys in the NBA that would have been the better number 2 players on a team. Like, that list would not be very long if it even existed. So to me, that's what that trade was. And the Cavs are still hoping to get to that point. Now, with Donovan Mitchell signing that contract extension, they have a lot more time to try and get to that point. That runway was very clearly lengthened this summer, but Mobley's the player to watch going into year 4. And we saw, I think, some glimpses of him in that Celtics series where he looked really great offensively. If he can bring that out more, the Cavs are going to be really, really difficult to stop. They are. There's not a ton of teams that I think, and I understand that their lineups can be clunky at times, but there's not a ton of teams, I think, that are going to have answers for Evan Mobley if he reaches his offensive ceiling, and Donovan Mitchell. So that's why, and I'm just more confident that I know what Donovan Mitchell is going to bring. That's why he's not the player to watch. Like, I expect him to play at an all-NBA level again. If Evan Mobley can be a guy that we're talking about as, hey, maybe Evan Mobley's getting votes for third team all-NBA next year, that I think would be such a major success.
The thing with Mobley is he's. I thought he was awesome as a rookie. I thought he should have been the rookie of the year. Right? I'm big on Evan Mobley. If you haven't gathered, I thought he was awesome in that season. The usual.
I've picked up on that.
The usual path for rookies is high picks go to bad teams. They have a first season, and then year 2, year 3, things take off. The problem here is that, like you said, in year 2, Donovan Mitchell came in. So any of that runway for him to take on more usage didn't exist. He couldn't do it. His usage has been exactly the same all 3 seasons. Now, some might say, well, if he was actually good enough, he would just demand more usage. But also, they don't need him to. They returned from a bad lottery team into a team that has, Eastern Conference Finals hopes. So he didn't take that usage on. It's the same every year. But his true shooting went from 54.9 to 59 to 62.7. Like, the efficiency, which is what happens with young players, increases all the time. He just wasn't given that standard process for young guys that, in year 2, they get to do more with the ball. In year 3, they get to do more because Altman should have sort of shifted the timeline and said, right, we're good now. Donovan Mitchell's here, and Mobley, you stay as that third guy. He doesn't need to become the second player. So, like, that's hard to look at in terms of where the numbers go and how he takes off from there. But to me, he's just filling the role that they need. They don't need him to be the number 1 offensive option in year 2 or year 3 or year 4. They don't need that. And I think that those efficiency improvements, who knows if the 3-point shooting is real, but those improvements I think are really key things. And we'll see. We'll see what they do. Maybe at some point there will be some level of disappointment that he hasn't taken over, but he hasn't needed to. It's not like they've gone, man, we really need you to do this, and you failed at it. And that's where I start to get more problems because they just haven't needed it, Danny.
Yeah, that is not what the Cavs have needed. And, I think that's a great point to bring up how the traditional trajectory of a high pick goes. Because look at the 2 guys who were drafted ahead of Evan Mobley, and that was the 2022 NBA draft, where Cade Cunningham went number 1, and Detroit has been a dumpster fire since. But it's kind of just been like, hey, Cade, go do whatever you want, and you're going to be awesome, and we will try and figure it out. And then you look at Jalen Green, who went number 2 to Houston, and I understand things were different this past year under Ime Udoka, but under Steven Silas, it was just kind of Jalen Green, go do whatever you want. Evan Mobley has played every single game of his career has mattered for winning. He won 40. He was on a team that won 44 games as a rookie, 51 games year 2. That stuff matters. So, yeah, he's not been needed to be the number 1 option. I don't know that he'll ever be needed to be the number 1 option, but I do think that for the Cavs to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, which they have hopes of, that the true shooting percentage and the efficiency at which he plays at is great. And I do think that's going to continue to improve. I don't think there needs to be a big jump in terms of his usage, but I think boosting it up just a little bit is something that would make the Cavs a much better, more potent offensive team.
I think that's right. The other thing that with him last year is he suffered that injury, which was a pretty significant ankle injury. He came back early from it, and he only played 30 minutes a night versus 33 the year before. So, if he plays the 33 minutes there, he averages 18 and 10 with 1.6 blocks or whatever, and you go, it's actually pretty good. And that trajectory is still there. It's going to be intriguing to watch it. I agree. He is someone to watch. This is year 4. He has got that max contract. He's a little bit underrated, I think, and we'll see exactly where this goes for Evan Mobley. Now, in terms of make or break players, this is one that is intriguing because there was a lot of negativity surrounding this guy through the fantasy circles, through real life NBA circles as well. And we are talking about Darius Garland because he had like a downturn in his production. Now, there are people who have 1-year memories, Danny, and they look at this and go, well, he can't exist next to Donovan Mitchell. Like, he's really struggled. He averaged only 18 points. He didn't shoot the ball as well. Like, it can't work. And all I'll say is I'll just look at the year before. Like, it was way different, and they worked together, and it was totally okay. And you forget that he got his face smashed in and couldn't eat for 4 or 5 weeks. And really, not that he was playing awesomely before that, but he had multiple injuries. Was it last year the one where he got the eye poke as well? Like, was that the year before?
So that was the first game of the year.
Okay.
So that was the first game that he and Donovan Mitchell ever played together. Gary Trent Jr. The Cavs opened up in Toronto. Gary Trent Jr. of the Raptors kind of gouged his eye a little bit. But, Darius is thought of as, the fractured jaw that he suffered in December against the Boston Celtics that cost him 6 weeks and like 15 pounds. And he had to consume all of his calories through a straw for 4 weeks. And it was just brutal. But there were some other injuries that he dealt with early in the year. Like I believe there was a thumb or wrist injury that kind of prevented him from finding a rhythm early on in the season. And I thought if you go back and look at those few games right before he fractured his jaw in mid-December, it started to look like Darius Garland was coming back. Like there's a 4 or 5 game stretch right there. It's like, okay, it looks like he's turning a corner. And then he runs into Kristaps Porzingis and his jaw is fractured. He misses 6 weeks. And he just was never able to figure it out. Part of that's because, putting weight on like that during an NBA season, really difficult. His numbers around the rim really went down. And it's hard for me to be hard on him about that because, if I were Darius Garland's size playing in the NBA, had my jaw fractured, would I be super excited to continuously drive to the basket over and over and over again? Probably not. And I think that was something that he needed an offseason to get past. So I'm buying stock on him because I do think that he and Mitchell can coexist together. I really do. That first year they played together was awesome. I see no reason why they can't have another year like that.
I agree. Now, look, in terms of a lot of the stuff with Garland and some of his metrics, there was a drop-off. There's no doubt. He played fewer minutes because of the injuries. His EPM went from 4.3 to 0.2. That is a drop. His assist rate fell a little bit. His turnover rate rose a little bit. Like, it wasn't a great season. And I'm not saying that there's, we can't say that, he needs to be better. But my major point is that, like, it has been better. Like, it has worked. We've seen it. It's not like one of those ones where people look at, the common comparison, I guess, Danny, would be, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray couldn't work together. Yeah, I know. They didn't work together. They never showed that they could work together. It literally never happened. But this has happened. This has worked together with the same cast of characters. It has worked, except for Max Strus. But I am firmly, at this point, believing that a lot of the reasons for Garland and the downturn this season are that jaw-related issue. And yeah, he had some struggles before that. But again, I do think he's going to be able to be better. But you're right. Maybe if he can't get back to that level of form, then maybe we do start to have some conversations around, 2 small guards in a backcourt and how all that stuff starts to work, which I know people are still doing anyway. But I'm not as quick to say that he needs to go and they need to move on because, again, we have seen that work. We've seen it work for a full season and it worked really, really well. The major storyline for this team this season, Danny, to me, the storyline around this team, again, because of the change they've made, is Kenny Atkinson. So I guess what you're looking for is an answer to the question is all that was missing was a better coach. To me, that is the real focus of what is happening this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things that I think, and obviously we're going to know about this when the playoffs arrive. Like this year for the Cavs, it's not about regular season success. They could win 57 games and that'd be great. But if they lose in the second round of the playoffs again, people are going to be upset. They could win 46 games and go on a run and get to the conference finals and people are going to be happy. Like this is a year that so much of whether it's a success or a failure depends on what they do in the postseason. That is, to me, the biggest thing to look forward to. And under JB Bickerstaff, I thought the Cavs often peaked too early. We talk about so much the stretch they had this past year where they went 18-1 over 19 games and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley missed half of that. And then they came back and the Cavs kept it rolling. But then after that, the Cavs were like a 500 basketball team again. They had a stretch. It wasn't as prolific as 18-1, but the year before they had a stretch where they were just insanely hot for like a month. They've not played under JB Bickerstaff their best basketball at the end of the season. They were not peaking at the right time. I think there's a better chance of that happening under Kenny Atkinson. I think a lot of it has to do with how minutes are allocated differently and stuff like that. So that is the thing to me is this team going to play its best basketball when it matters the most? Because the last couple of years they haven't. And that, I think, is directly tied to Kenny Atkinson.
We talked about the Garland and Mitchell pairing. To me, the burning question, though, around this team is not about the 2 small guards in the backcourt. It's about the 2 close to 7-footers in the front court. Is this the final definitive test of this front court? I know Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley both signed extensions, but I would say majority of Cavs people would watch this and say, yeah, Evan Mobley probably does play his best when he's playing at the 5. And obviously Jarrett Allen plays at the 5. Is this, I would say there's more of a chance of this being the final season of that setup versus the Mitchell Garland one. But like, how do you see that sort of combination? Because Kenny Atkinson, again, has not been a big ball proponent throughout his coaching career. So how do you see that dynamic sort of working?
Right. Obviously Kenny Atkinson does have experience coaching Jarrett Allen. The two were in Brooklyn together very early in Allen's career. And I think that they have a very good relationship together. And I think that's part of the reason why Jarrett Allen extended with the Cavs, because I did not anticipate that happening. I think Jarrett Allen is a player that is probably worth a little bit more on the open market should he have reached free agency than the Cavs were able to pay him. And they paid him the maximum contract that they could pay him. It's not a max contract like Evan Mobley and Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell have, but it was the most money they could give him in an extension. So I do think they're going to do everything in their power to make this work. With that being said, I think it's very interesting that Jarrett Allen agreed to and signed this contract extension on August 2nd. What does that mean? It means on February 2nd, which is 4 days before the NBA trade deadline, Jarrett Allen becomes eligible to be traded. So the Cavs are going to do everything to try and make this work. But they're very clearly, in my opinion, there is a visible exit ramp that if it doesn't work, they can pivot off of this. I think Jarrett Allen has a ton of value on the trade market. I think he's a very good player, but it just might not be the right fit. It can be the right fit. I think that requires Evan Mobley to up his three-point shooting volume instead of taking 1.2 a game where he shot 37%. I think he needs to take like 4.5 a game and still shoot 37%. Is he capable of that? I'm not so sure, but I think if those two are going to work long-term, that needs to become part of Evan Mobley's game much more than it has been in the past.
I agree with everything you just said. Your bold prediction for this season, Danny, is, I'm not sure how bold it is, but you're out here telling us that they're going to be a top 4 seed again. They're competing with the Celtics. There's Philadelphia in that mix. I guess you've always got to sort of consider Miami, but I don't think they're anywhere close to that good, honestly. Who else could be challenging for a top 4 seed? I guess the Magic were in that mix last season and they got better, so maybe that's one that they need to try and hold off there. You got Philly, Milwaukee, Boston, the Knicks. Fair enough. There is a battle going on there. Probably 6 teams, I would say, who are looking for that top 4 seed.
Yeah, and I think that the Cavs are sort of due for some health luck this season, considering what they went through last year. But I just think that if they have a healthy Donovan Mitchell, I don't see how they win less than 50 games. Last year, they didn't have a healthy Donovan Mitchell, and they didn't make it to that 50-win mark. So if they get him healthy, I think that he's such a floor raiser that they're going to win 50-plus games. And I believe that it has only ever happened one time since the Eastern Conference, since the NBA expanded playoffs to 16 teams. It's only happened one time that a team in the East won 50 games or more and did not have a top 4 seed. So I would expect if the Cavs win 50 games, they're going to have a top 4 seed. So I do think that they're going to be a team that I'm not sold on their postseason success for next year, just because I'm not sure I believe in Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen working together. I think they're 2 great players. I just think they're kind of oil and water. But when you look at the rest of the East, Boston's really good. New York, I think, is really good. Philly added Paul George. Milwaukee has arguably the best player in the Eastern Conference in Giannis. The Cavs are going to beat one of those teams. They're going to have a better record than one of those teams, maybe even 2 of those teams. I think they're going to be 3rd or 4th in the Eastern Conference again this year.
Well, that does bring me into predicting the team's record. And you said they didn't hit the 50 wins last season, Danny, but you think they will get it this year. You got them at 53-29. What do you think an actual, realistic upper limit is on what they can do? Could they be a 57-win team if everything sort of clicks? What's the upper limit here?
I think it's probably 55 or 56 wins. The 53 might be a little bit optimistic. I think the bottom, if they're not healthy, obviously, who knows what can happen. I think if they are healthy, we're looking at, a floor of like 48 or 49 wins, what they were last year. But I think that they're just going to gel under Kenny Atkinson quicker than maybe we expect the team to gel under a new head coach. I think that is something to watch for. And I do think that one of the things, this is a roster that is constructed to have a really good defense. I don't see how that defense is going to just all of a sudden not be good because they don't have a head coach that is very, defensive oriented the way JB Bickerstaff was. I just don't think that disappeared. But what the Cavs did under Bickerstaff the last few years was they were a very slow team in terms of pace. I think they were 25th last year. They were 27th the year before. Like these games are a slog. Kenny Atkinson was the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. The first 3 years, his teams were top 10 in the NBA in pace. That fourth year, they were 11th. I'm not saying the Cavs are going to get that high, but I expect them to probably be top half of the league. And I think that paired with really good defense on the other end of the floor, I just think they're going to be a hard matchup for a lot of teams on a regular basis in the regular season.
I agree about the pace thing. It is, again, we talk about changing the minutes and the rotational decisions from Bickerstaff to Atkinson, but going from a very slow team to a team that at least pushes into the top half is a change to what this team has been doing. Now, to get you out of here, Danny, I've got a little quiz for all the hosts. It's very, very straightforward, and I think you're going to knock it out of the park. But it is the 24-25 NBA season. So all I want to know from you, it's not even a quiz. It's just like let's just talk about old players. Who is someone that comes to your mind that in Cleveland Cavaliers history has worn either number 24 or number 25 on their jersey? 27 players have worn those two numbers. Who's the first name that comes to mind?
So the first name that would come to mind for me would be Richard Jefferson, who wore number 24, a member of the 2016 Cavs championship team. That would be the guy that pops into my mind first when I think of the number 24 in Cleveland.
Yes, that is correct. He did wear number 24 in those seasons. 25 is retired. Do you know who for?
That would be Mr. Mark Price, who, that's probably the better answer that I should have given.
No, there's no right or wrong answer.
I look up at the number every time I'm inside Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. But considering Richard Jefferson is one of the 15 players in Cleveland Cavaliers history that won a championship here, that's where my mind went.
There's no right or wrong answer. It's just what number and what memory evokes in you when you think about those numbers. The other players like Marcus Morris wore it last season. Larry Markkinen was 24 as well. There's a lot of guys who have worn number 24 for this team. Larry Nance Jr. wore it back when he was on this squad. I'm looking back at some of the old names here. Jason Capono, Doniel Marshall. They gave it to a lot of sharpshooters here, didn't they? Scotty Hobson. Okay. Yeah, there you go. There's the number, 24-25, and that brings us to the end of this show. Danny, tell people what you have got going over on at Locked On Cavaliers at the moment, and people go check out you over there as the new host and a new flavor you're bringing to the show.
We're diving into, this week, we're diving into some of the lineups that we can't wait to see this year for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I know that things are relatively similar in terms of the roster from last year, but with a new coach, I think it just brings the opportunity for some creativity. So that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to talking about this week on Locked On Cavs. Also going to start to get into some player previews. The roster, again, hasn't changed much, but what should we be expecting out of the guys that are back for the Cavs next year? I can't wait to dive into that too.
Make sure you're checking out Danny. Follow him on the social media and check out Locked On Cavs. Danny, thanks again for coming on the show.
Absolutely, anytime.
And that is the end of the Cavs preview. And while you're here, why don't you give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and then you'll never miss a show, because we've got more shows coming this week. I'm trying to think which shows we've got coming. I know we've got a Bucks preview coming. There's a Magic preview coming this week. There's one more coming. May even sneak a mock draft in at some point. Who knows? We'll see. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.